Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome, everybody, to Nightlight. Thanks so much for sharing your time with us. We really do appreciate it. Mark has a great lineup for you tonight, but before we get to that, I have to thank Ken Quiethawk for his amazing introduction. You can find him at nativestorytellers.com. The website is phenomenal, and it reminds us of a way of keeping track of history and cosmology and stories that is lost to the generations now, and it's kind of sad because the native storytellers have been able to preserve history far longer than a lot of our textbooks have. Mark has a great show tonight. He's got two amazing people and talking on subjects that will be familiar with a lot of those of us who have been around for a while. I'm looking very forward to both the guests that he has on tonight, so let's get started. Mark, it's all yours.
Hey, Barbara, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you doing?
Good. Oh, doing well. Okay, let's get started. Want to maximize our time with our guest. Carlisle Rachel said our guest has great subject material like she did about last night's show with Gary, and we have more fascinating shows coming up, and we'll have even more new voices. Scott Skelton has had a lengthy career in journalism. He was an editor and proofreader at the University of Oregon Publications Department. He would go on to co-author Rod Serling's Night Gallery and After Hours tour. He is researching for another book on Night Gallery, and that's probably going to be a lot of our focus this evening. Scott's research has been quoted in other prestigious publications on Rod's career. Recently, he was a presenter at the Twilight Zone at 60 conference. Scott and his co-author Jim Benson have collaborated with Universal Studios DVD and Blu-ray versions of the Night Gallery. Scott's website is nightgallery.net. Welcome, Scott. How are you?
Fine. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing well. I'm really looking forward to the first hour with you and the second hour with Greg. There just seems to be this resurgence of all things Rod Serling. There's we worked on promoting the Twilight Zone for its 60th anniversary conference. Starting like June. This year is the 50th anniversary of the Night Gallery. There's we were just talking right before we went live. There's like that new Twilight Zone series, and there was the one back in the mid '80s. What is it about Rod Serling that attracts people?
He has a kind of a universal approach to his humanist dealings. He, I think, even his most minor plays have an approach that respects humanity, and I think he's a humanist at the very center. So even if he's writing something that is science fiction or horror or fantasy, it's mostly about character, about the people he's talking about, their essential respect for their humanity. And I think that's what appeals to people even after all this time. He can spin a great yarn. He's one of the best fireside, storytellers of all time. But it would have nothing going for it unless he also saw them as full-blooded human beings with, yearnings and passions and a kind of a sense of their own shared, beingness in this world, sort of, I guess you would say.
Yeah, at the TZ at 60 conference, a lot of people were just fascinated by the twist endings and moving into the ushering in like the science fiction age. But so many people were there, really focused on the spirituality of the messages, which I'm just buttressing what you just said about the humanity, respecting humanity throughout so many of the episodes. But when the Twilight Zone ended in '63, there was kind of like a 6-year gap before the Night Gallery started in 1969. But Rod was actually moving into creating some of the two of the greatest movies of that genre. You get like 7 Days in May, political thriller, and then you get Planet of the Apes. That's like one of the all-time great sci-fi. Then he eventually goes into getting started with the Night Gallery, and it seemed like it had a great premise, promising start, and I think we're going to spend some of tonight re-evaluating that. How did this series get underway, and what was going on at that transitional time from going from Planet of the Apes to Night Gallery?
Well, his segues into big screen stuff, and you named the two best movies he ever worked on, which is 7 Days in May and Planet of the Apes. They were both skillful, critiques of our society at the time. 7 Days in May, the president who is the the main protagonist, was very much a kind of a JFK/LBJ kind of character who was being severely criticized for some of his policies. But what was the critical issue about the whole movie was a right-wing coup against what was seen as too much diplomacy and not enough force. And because of that, I think he foresaw what, frankly, I see as a lot of what's happening today. But Planet of the Apes was a more broader spanning criticism of our culture, which tends to denigrate what we don't understand. And both of those films were pure Serling because he was a social critic first and a storyteller second, I think. All of his shows, even some of the lighter, I guess, materials he did for both Night Gallery and for the Twilight Zone, were about how small humanity can be sometimes. I mean, he did a lot of ones about that were substantiating the better qualities of humanity, but there's a smallness that he would not shrink away from, and he wanted to put it out front, put a spotlight on to tell us that sometimes we are awesome, and other times we are we don't show our best face. And 7 Days in May and Planet of the Apes showed us what the punishment is for that kind of thinking.
Okay. That is relevant to today. But how did Rod's doing these great movies? How did he move back into television series after about a 6-year hiatus?
I think rather easily, actually. I think he, I think anyway, his scripts for Night Gallery, I don't find any lesser than his scripts for Twilight Zone. I mean, I know the response to critically was not as strong because there were other people in charge of the production of the show. But in terms of what Serling produced for the series, his scripts were directly in line with the kind of serious social commentary he was creating for the Twilight Zone. And also about, as you say, the kind of a spirituality, the sense that we are as a people should be most directly trying to uphold each other and be stronger for each other. And I think that comes out in his strongest scripts for both the series.
And speaking of both the series, in Night Gallery, you have a lot of the Twilight Zone actors and actresses returning. You have Rodney McDowall. He's moving from Planet of the Apes into the pilot episode of the series, and you have Agnes Moorehead and Burgess Meredith, Mickey Rooney. You have and even though it wasn't as well received as the Twilight Zone, but it was also branching into a more of a horror genre. People like Stephen King, back in the 80s, thought it was really a terrific series. I think said The Caterpillar was one of the greatest shows ever.
Yeah, I don't think Stephen had a huge respect for the series, but he understood good drama, and he understood that the Caterpillar, which is I would say by far the most notorious of the Night Gallery shows, had a kind
That's
of
a good word.
creeping. The great thing is you don't see any gore. You don't even see the main horror, the earwig, the caterpillar they're talking about, the one burrowing through the man's brain. But you see all the effects of it. So it's really a very subtle piece. And Lawrence Harvey, the actor who stars in it, took it only because he thought it was such a well-written piece, that it was such a clever psychological display of these frankly kind of rather unhealthy sexual obsessions of this character, and how it affected him emotionally and psychologically, and affected the other people around him. And frankly, what Serling did, he was adapting a short story that was written in 1908 by a former, diplomat in the Malaysian area. He had lived in Borneo. And he wrote this piece. And when you read it, there's frankly nothing of the subtlety that Serling brings to it in his adaptation. Essentially, Serling takes 2/3 of the short story, adapts it, fits his own ideas into it, and he makes it this brilliant piece of theater that if you read the short story, you would have gotten none of the quality aspects of it. It just shows you how Serling was such a understanding developer of drama. He was a dramatist first. I mean, he could write short stories and novels as well as the next guy, but his real understanding was drama on television, in theater, radio, that kind of thing. He understood the human voice and how its ability to come across to other people as this amazing font of human wealth of understanding. It was great.
Yeah, and just to stay on the subject for a little while longer, and what you're saying about the drama for TV, maybe one of my favorites that could be fall into the example you're giving is Dr. Stringfellow's Rejuvenator.
Yes.
There's a lot of really good TV drama packed in that 20 some minutes of actual air time. You see a dad going to a doctor who's basically just selling and just is a snake oil salesman, but you really get the actor does a great job of demonstrating his panic and concern over his sick daughter, plus the really creepy ending that is more reminiscent of the Twilight Zone.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, it was a very Twilight Zone-ish episode. It's one of my favorites from Night Gallery. It's
yeah, it is mine too.
He presented this kind of unpleasant character study of a con man who would bilk anyone to get a little more cash, and he promises this poor farmer that his daughter, who he knows not because of any intelligence of his, but because a former doctor who he speaks with regularly knows is peritonitis. Her, one of her organs has exploded and she's dying. And he essentially doesn't give a shit about it, pardon my French. He just, he decides to sell him some more of his snake oil. And this poor child dies after he's promised this guy that he's essentially going to resurrect her almost.
Mm-hmm.
It's a horrendously cold-hearted piece of drama. And, I don't think Serling would have allowed it to have passed without him being upbraided strongly, and he winds up having a horrible death because of his cold-heartedness. But, there's definitely some links today to current health care and that kind of thing. We all see this kind of thing all the time, this kind of cold-heartedness. And this is just one more analogy that fits perfectly into our current state of affairs, where we're dealing with people who don't really have any more empathy than they can possibly imagine, unless they're getting something, paid from behind or something like that, I guess you would say.
No. You're successfully arguing your point. I think we've all, you probably just look at the opioid crisis and realize, a lot of doctors were, pushing, knew they were pushing a bad product, but we'll save that for another show. But there are also like reoccurring themes, like the Night Gallery had the doll, and it just seemed like it was doing remake of Talkie Tina about 10 years later, and the Telly Savalas one. It was actually kind of funny. He's throwing the doll in the garbage can, yelling at it, and the doll is kind of like the same theme. That it's just there, and it just really annoys you. But there is a little bit more of the horror element added to it. That one was kind of an interesting look at this same theme.
I agree. Yes. Living Doll was, the main villain was the stepfather, who did not have any particular feeling for his stepdaughter, who was obviously treating her brutally and without compassion. And he was treated in a perfectly Twilight Zone aspect as kind of like, well, you're not worthy of being amongst true human beings, and he wound up being murdered by the doll that was protecting her young charge, his stepdaughter, who was being, well, we can guess, being brutalized by her stepfather, or at least being badly treated. The Night Gallery version was slightly different. The victim of this was essentially the people who had been colonized in India by Britain's Iron Boot. The character who is the victim of the doll isn't a callous stepfather. He's a member of the Queen's Army who has essentially brutalized a resistor, someone who said, we're not standing up for this, we're going to push against you, someone who wants, independence for India, which ultimately came in the 1940s. But this short story that Serling adapted was from 1910. And that's a time when India was still under the boot of Great Britain. So, even though it's a great crackerjack tale of a doll enacting vengeance on a person, it's also about, I guess, about colonialism and its cruelty, ultimately, when you take a sovereign nation and put it under the boot of another nation simply because they have, better weapons than you. They're both very effective. I think The Doll is considered to be one of the best Night Gallery episodes, and certainly most people remember Living Doll as one of the best Twilight Zone episodes. Twilight Zone was, that particular episode was not written by Serling, but he certainly understood its value, and I think he followed it through in the Night Gallery episode when he adapted that story himself.
Okay, and Scott, we did a review of a couple of our favorite episodes. We need to take a look at Rod introducing the episode. Walks into view and goes to the painting that sets the theme for tonight's story. And a couple weeks ago, you were just at the Universal Studios studying these paintings and the prints, and I'd like to hear more about that. Who was painting them? I didn't know they were curated somewhere. Tell us a little bit more about that experience. That sounds very interesting.
Sure. Rod's idea at the time when he created the series of Night Gallery was to have him as he would show up on screen as a curator at a museum and be presenting paintings and sculptures and things like that would illustrate the main themes of the stories he was telling. So the show was set up so that paintings would be the main introduction to each of the stories. And for the pilot film, which was a one-off that was presented in November of 1969, they got one of the studio's best artists, Jaroslav Gaber. He was a Hungarian artist who was one of their best artists. But for the series, when it became a regular series, Gaber was considered unavailable, so they went to one of the other production illustrators on the set, who was Tom Wright. Tom was immensely gifted and was capable of, at very short notice, producing handfuls of paintings that all looked like they were done by somebody different, with no identifiable stylistic qualities that would tell you, oh, it's all done by the same guy. None of them looked like that. So Night Gallery had obviously people in the production area who were very savvy, and what we're trying to do with this new book, the book is an attempt to showcase the art for the series, which by far over the years, by the decades since it's been made, since the 70s, has been one of the strongest selling points of the series. People love the art. And so what we're trying to do with Creature Features publications, we're trying to create a book that is like a coffee table art book, like you would have the finest artworks in the Louvre, or the London Museum, or the Getty Museum. You would have page by page a full color reproduction of the painting, a description of what we know of how it was made, luckily, we have a lot of the input from the artists themselves, and we think it's going to be one of the best books they put out because, frankly, the artwork is astounding. After all these years, it's good to see them in a more respectful place. What we did at Universal, because we've only been able to find about 50 in the hands of collectors, we're trying to reproduce all of them. And to do that, because some of them are in places we have no idea where they are, we went to Universal Studios and said, we'd like a license to print these, and we'd like you to produce the images we need to publish. So for the 50 or so that we cannot find anywhere out there in the world, which may have been destroyed or kept in private hands who do not know us or something like that, we're asking Universal to produce shots of the painting, and so far they've been very helpful at that. And we just simply want to produce the best possible book of the images that were created for the series, since we think they're actually really important. They're as good as anything I've seen in any 20th century survey course of art for, art history in the college course I've taken. I think they're awesome. But at any rate, Universal has been very helpful for us, and they're producing, as we speak, images directly from the film to reproduce in this book, and it's. Wow. I'm very proud to be affiliated with this series. So it's a product we've been thinking about for at least the last 25 years.
And Scott, speaking of the images, just really outstanding pieces of art. You do have images on your website, nightgallery.net, and you can go. I was looking at them, and you have like all of them there, and once you look a little closer at the lone survivor, that one just kind of caught my eye. The solitary person in the dinghy had like a skull. Kind of missed that.
He's obviously not all there. He's essentially a phantom, a ghost, a skull and some rags and bones.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it was just going to your website to get a little bit better view. Really illustrates the point that you're making about the need to have a coffee table book of these images available for us to appreciate.
Yes. There are a lot of fans of macabre art, and I think this is among the highest levels of interest in that area, certainly, yes.
And were the paintings done after the script was written, or did Tom write do a painting and inspired Rod or one of the other Night Gallery screen authors to base a story on the painting? How did that work?
That was fairly well. Here's how it would work. The producer was Jack Laird. He loved Tom's work. He hired him specifically for this piece. What Jack would do was give him one of three things: the script, the short story, or a short reduction of the story, and tell him this is what we want. But after that, he would give him like complete freedom in expressing what he thought would be the primal idea that would express the story. He didn't tell him, do this, do that. Tom would have to go in and invent the concept, visual concept, that would tell the story in the space of a few brush strokes. So, and he succeeded almost all the time. I mean, he was very gifted in that area, and he himself being rather young, he didn't know all the aspects of art history he needed to, so he would do research and sometimes come up with a style or another artist's style that he could like borrow and translate into some more modern terms. And he did that like so often. You look at all the paintings, and very few of them you can identify as the same artist. He was gifted at that. His daughter, Siobhan, told me that she thought he would have been a great art forger. And I think that's probably pretty well true, because he could work in any artistic style, ancient to modern. And he often did. I mean, minimalist, still lifes. One of his favorite styles was Impressionism, and he did a few in that. He did abstract, he did semi-abstract, he did straight, obvious visions of what's actually true in life. I mean, he did all of these things. He was very gifted. He is very gifted, and we've been lucky to have him offer to us information on how he thought about each project, how he was inspired by something and brought it to fruition. Tom Wright is a great artist. He's now actually a film director. He spends a lot of his time directing episodes of Supernatural and NCIS and other TV shows. But he's still a very gifted artist. And, if he stopped directing, he could still paint for people and still get paid very handsomely, I'm sure.
Okay, and so let's cover a little bit of the artwork. You've also done a lot of work on your website, emphasizing another art form used in the series, the music, and you talk about the early use of synthesizers as kind of showing up after the initial success of Walter Carlos's Switched on Bach album. So, can you give us a little bit of background on how the music was used for this series of macabre stories?
Sure. The producer who was hired by Universal was a guy named Jack Lynyrd, who was a jazz aficionado from back when, but he also had a true faith in electronic music as it was being developed in the late 60s and early 70s. And one of the finest composers and workers within that realm in those days was a guy named Gil Mallet, who started as a bass baritonist and did a number of fine albums for Blue Note, but who was also starting to build his own instruments and was keen to produce film scores and television scores using these things. And apparently, somehow, Jack knew about it and called him in to do certainly the theme, and then later some of the film scores for some of the episodes themselves, including Dr. Stringfellow's Rejuvenator, which was a brilliant score. What Gil did was, he kind of probably shouldn't have done it at the time. He was scoring an electronic score for the Universal blockbuster, the Andromeda Strain. And Jack brought him off and said, "Look, I want you to write the score for Night Gallery." And Gil told him, "Look, I can't do the entire series. I might be able to give you a theme, but I would have to be doing it under the table, because if Robert Wise, the director of the Andromeda Strain, found out I was taking time away from creating his score, I would be canned, essentially." So he did it surreptitiously and created a score for the first season and then later the second season of Night Gallery, using mostly his electronic instruments that he created himself. I mean, he things like the Percussitron 3 and the Doomsday Machine. This is the things he called these instruments, these electronic instruments that he created. They're unlike anything heard before or after. When you hear composers who use electronic instruments in other movies at the time, Jerry Goldsmith was using them quite a lot in stuff like the reincarnation of Peter Proud and stuff like that. But they were all commercially available electronic instruments. What Gil did was create his own instruments. And that's why you hear them today and they still sound so fresh, because he was creating that no one was ever using on any other production. And Gil was doing scores for the pilot movie with the $6 Million Man. And it has a sound like nothing else because he's using instruments that no one has ever used before or since.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Gil was a very talented guy, and but the great thing about the profile of the music on the show for Night Gallery was that he used composers who were not the usual run-of-the-mill guys. They were usually someone out of the way. I mean, he would use Ed Sauter, who was best known for the Sauter-Finnegan Orchestra back in the 40s and 50s. But he was creating incredible scores for, like, The Caterpillar or Brenda or The Return of the Sorcerer. And he was using Paul Glass, who was kind of a specialist in atonal scores. But he created these brilliant scores for, like, Silence No Secrets No, and Question of Fear, and Oliver Nelson, who was a brilliant jazz artist, who he brought on to do scores for some of the shows. And he was using people that weren't normally used at Universal because he didn't want the same sound that anyone else had. He wanted something new and different and fresh. And that's one of the great things about Night Gallery as a show. It sounds and looks different than any other show at the time.
Yeah, it is Gil Millet also responsible for the Kolchak theme song?
Yes, he was. He borrowed that from a film he did. What was the film? The Quester tapes. Gene Roddenberry TV movie. It was a secondary theme that he borrowed and became the theme for Kolchak the Night Stalker, the great horror TV show from the 70s, yes.
Okay, I just didn't realize that he was involved with the Andromeda Strain. I think you're giving us all this like behind the scenes stuff. It just really synthesizes all the creativity that was going into this series.
Yeah. Gil was obviously into other stuff at the time. He was becoming a real popular artist at Universal because all the producers really liked his music, and his music sounds like no one else. I mean, I listen to his stuff, and it's still, you can't hear references to any other composer. He was quite the brilliant guy. I'm sad I didn't get to meet him personally, before he passed on. But he was not just a great jazz artist. He was a great, dramatic scoring artist too. I think his greatest score is probably his score for a Universal television movie called Frankenstein: The True Story. But I mean, probably everyone knows the Andromeda Strain because it was one of the great science fiction movies of the 70s.
Mm-hmm. Wow, I did not know that. I'm just glad to have you on to educate us on all these little tidbits. But when they add up, they just give you a fuller picture. And okay, so for your book, Rod Serling's Night Gallery and After Hours Tour, you did interview a lot of the actors and actresses, the technicians, all the people working on the series. How did they react, or what were their reflections 40 50 years later?
Well, it was at the time it was in the 90s, so it was only a few 25 years later, I would guess. But at the time, though, however, I mean, not everyone we asked to go on the record would. But we ultimately interviewed about 150 people, actors, directors, writers, directors, assistant directors, cinematographers, musicians, the whole, essentially anyone who worked behind the scenes. And the ones who did, with almost no exceptions, were wanting to discuss very positive aspects of their experience. And some of the actors were also doing other stuff at Universal. Obviously, it was the most productive studio in television at the time. I mean, no one was beating Universal at creating television product in the 70s. But he had lovely things to say about Night Gallery, even though some of it was like, I'm essentially creating sausages in a production factory, but he obviously had enough respect for the material and the people he worked with to want to discuss how much it meant to him, and he did. He was Dillman was an actor who was raised in theater, and was he did Tennessee Williams and Eugene O'Neill and some of the great theatrical pieces, but he also had to raise a family and needed to do television work because, frankly, that's where the money was. So he did that, and he enjoyed some of it, and he seemed to enjoy a lot of his work on Night Gallery, and he was not alone. It was part of it you have to see as the realities of the period. I mean, as an actor, you had to go where you were wanted, but a lot of them really liked the work they did there, and many of them mentioned the quality of the scripts because they were frankly better than they would be getting on Mission Impossible or Hawaii Five-0. These scripts are pretty awesome. Not all of them were written by Rod Serling, but a lot of them were,
Mhm. Good point. And when you were interviewing the variety of people for the who were involved with the shows. Did you talk with Steven Spielberg? He got his start on a Night Gallery episode. How did that go? Did you have a chance to talk to him and get his reflections?
I wish we could have persuaded him. I mean, but frankly, by that time he had done numerous interviews about his work on the show. I mean, he even recorded a film for Today Show. He did an interview with Gene Siskel, and so we were able to cull from that his side of the show. And we also got to talk with other people behind the scenes at Night Gallery who dealt with Steven Spielberg and were able to comment on that too. So we had kind of both sides. Even if Steven had no interest in dealing with us in 1995, 6, whenever we were asking him, we didn't need to go very far because there was already stuff out there on the internet in which he was discussing with other journalists his experience. So we matched that with the interviews with some of the people in the cast, and we spoke with some of the actors like Tom Bosley, who remembers distinctly working with Steven both those times he was working with him on Night Gallery. And we got a pretty rounded picture of what it was like at the time. I mean, Steven was under a tremendous amount of pressure. This was the first stuff he'd ever done. He'd only done a sort of quasi-professional piece called Ramblin that he tried to get people interested at Universal at watching. And so one of the administrators there, Sid Sheinberg, said, let's give this kid a chance, and started shopping around for production. That's how we got the job on the pilot film of Night Gallery. And he did an outstanding job, I must say. I mean, that episode, The Eyes, that he did was brilliant. And he did a piece for Night Gallery's first season called Make Me Laugh, which was unfortunately not well received at NBC. But I don't think it was his fault because he wasn't the problem. The problem was the casting of the main parts, which were not his problem. But at any rate, at some point, NBC thought he should never work in the business again and tried to cut him out. Luckily, that did not happen, obviously, because we have this incredibly rich, what do you want to call it? His oeuvre, his portfolio, his great film
legacy.
Since then, his legacy, yes, exactly. We wouldn't have Jaws if he'd been canned, and we wouldn't have Duel, frankly. Look, I mean, Saving Private Ryan.
The concentration camp. Yeah, the E.T. and the
Absolutely, it wouldn't have E.T. You wouldn't have Close Encounters of the Third Kind. You wouldn't have Schindler's List.
No, that was the one I was thinking of.
I mean, so some guy at NBC had his head up his wazoo or something like that because this kid was talented, and you can't blame him on having a badly cast piece. I mean, he had no choice in that. It was chosen by the producers. So, at any rate, I think Steve has done very well for himself, and he started out on Night Gallery and did a great job as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and Diane Keaton was there, and she would go on to star in the Godfather trilogy. I mean, people got went on to be huge actors and actresses from their
Diane
one experience with
one of her first pieces. Yes.
Wow.
And Mark Hamill,
which one was he in that launched? Got him started.
Mark Hamill was in a very late second season piece called There Aren't Any More Banes. He played a rather surly messenger boy. but I mean, this was like what 5 years before Star Wars. He was just starting out, and I mean, it's hilarious seeing him now. And Diane Keaton the same way. I mean, she had a very early role in a first season Night Gallery, and obviously she made Godfathers and Annie Hall and any number of pieces since then. But they were all just starting out. And Lindsay Wagner was also, before she was a big hit with The Bionic Woman, had 2 roles in Night Gallery. I mean, they were kids, and they cut their teeth on television episodes like Night Gallery, and they were really good in the roles they did. So it just shows you that they were correct in hiring them.
Okay, and Scott, we're down to about 3 minutes or so. Where can you tell people where they can get your Rod Serling's Night Gallery and After Hours tour, and when's the new book coming out? And if you want to plug your website and anything else.
Sure. We're still selling the After Hours tour companion guide to Night Gallery. That can be found on any major bookstore, but we sell it also, or at least give links to it at nightgallery.net, which is also the Night Gallery website. As for the new book, well, we're still putting that together. We're hoping to have a release date in January, but until then, you can keep checking creaturefeatures.com, which is going to have all the most information. It's going to be where it's going to be sold anyway, so that's the place you would have to go. We're still putting it together. I mean, we're still working with Universal to gather all the images, so we're not done yet. But we've got most of the text written because we've had to go to Tom Wright and Yaroslav Gaber's son Thomas to get information on each of the paintings, and we've already written most of the book. We just need the images now, and we're gathering them as we speak. So, but those are the 2 websites I would pay attention to if you had any interest in this. But you can also find book sales on Barnes & Noble and Amazon and the other standard sellers of this kind of stuff. But if you want the paintings book specifically, that will have to be only through creaturefeatures.com, which will have all the information on that.
Okay. Well, Scott, we're just about out of time. Our second hour guest is here, and I just want to thank you for being a terrific guest. This is fun, just reminiscing about one of my favorite shows growing up as a kid, and just watching them, the late night, reruns. This is just a lot of fun. Really appreciate your insights. Oh, good. We'll have to have you back when the new book is out. And again, I want to thank you. And we have our second hour guest here. Get the archive to you tomorrow, and we will stay in touch.
Sounds great. Thanks a lot for your time.
All right. Thank you, Scott. Okay, and Barbara, if you want to bring Greg on, that'll be fine. It's here's some clicking, so I think he's there. And
hello.
Yeah, there he is. Yeah, Barbara put on her high-heeled sneakers for this show. Yeah, we have our, Barbara's first Wall of Fame project she's working on. And Greg Martin is our guest. He's the first one to autograph a photo, a band photo, and it's on her Wall of Fame in her kitchen. And Greg Martin is a super special DJ collaborator. His fellow Kentuckian Merle Fankhauser graduated from Nightlight Part 2 to make 2 appearances on Greg's Lowdown Hoedown on WDNSFM.com out of Glasgow, Kentucky. And you may have seen Greg and his Grammy Award-winning band, the Kentucky Headhunters, at a few Farm Aids. Perhaps you have one or several of their 11 CDs. Greg also works closely with Vintage Guitar Magazine. Greg is the Headhunters lead guitarist and will begin teaching guitar lessons starting next month. And we'll be talking about the Kentucky Headhunters' recent release of Live at the Ramblin Man Fair. Welcome, Greg. How are you?
I'm doing great, Mark. How are you?
Oh, I'm fine. I'm just glad you're here with us. The Headhunters have nothing to do with the Night Gallery, but that's Barbara says she likes my programming that throws curveballs at the audience like that. So we'll have to we'll still make this work and have a lot of fun tonight.
Oh, that's fine, man. The Headhunters are one scary-looking bunch, so we can make this work.
Okay.
I mean, come on, there's more in common than you think, probably.
Okay, so a scary-looking group of guys is the common theme for tonight's show.
It's a wonderful being here on your show. And hello, Barbara and Mark. It is wonderful being here. It's just, I'm sorry, my technical inabilities were a little out of control of tonight. I finally figured out what to do, and I'm sorry about that, guys. But
okay,
you know how it is in Kentucky. We found to figure things out.
Okay, we're here now, so that's all that matters. But what's the story behind Live at the Ramblin Man Fair? You have American country rock bands recording a concert in England. How did that happen?
Well, for many years, the Headhunters, I mean, it's quite a long history. We really hit the road as the Kentucky Headhunters. The band started as the Kentucky Headhunters, as we know it, in 1986. In 1989, we signed our first record deal with Mercury Nashville. And for many years, we just toured in the States and would go to Canada. And, we really didn't fly. We had a couple of guys in the band that weren't real keen on flying, which I understand that. And we just made, I just figured for years, it got up to about 8 years ago, and I thought, well, we're never going to England, and I was okay with that, to be honest with you. I like, and then with the success of Blackstone Cherry, which Richard Young's son is the drummer in that band, and we know all those guys really well because they grew up in this area and they use the same practice house. They have become quite a draw in England. They're huge over there, and they would get asked about us and want to know why we never come over. So lo and behold, 2016, we have an offer to play Sweden Rock over in Sweden, and we played that, and then we flew home, and then we went back and done our first tour of England. About, I can't remember, July or something like that. It's all a blur now. But one of the shows that we did was at Ramblin Man, and unbeknownst to us, we didn't know they were actually taping the show, on multi-track. Had no idea. And we found out later that the show was available for us to review and to check out. So brought it back to the States and took it to the studio, and we checked it out, and we thought, well, hey, man, we got an album here. So mixed it up just right and added a couple of bonus tracks with Johnnie Johnson on it that we had laying around, and that was picked up by Alligator Records, Bruce Siglar. That was the second release on Alligator. But we have to thank Blackstone Cherry for the initial trip over. We've since been over, this year makes 3 times, and it was great. I have to be honest with you, I'm not going to lie to you, I don't like leaving the house as much as I did, 10, 15 years ago. But I'm really happy now that my friends and it's amazing, Mark, that Richard and Fred were the first band I ever played with was with those guys right there. And I was talking to my wife today about that, and that's just amazing that we're still playing. And I got to experience going to England with those guys, because when we started out in Midcalf County, going to school together, we just thought maybe if we were lucky, we might get to play at the Glasgow Armory. And then, you start setting your goals. You go, oh, maybe we'll get to play Louisville someday, Nashville, New York. We never envisioned as we were growing up that we would ever get to go to England. And where so many of our heroes come from. But like I say, we had no idea that tape was running that day, and we were lucky enough that Alligator Records was kind enough to put it out, and it's out there now. Now we've got some, we just went back in October and played again, and we got some more live shows. We might actually we might release a couple tracks from some of that stuff. So it's we're a work in progress, you might say.
Okay, so just to stick with the CD, the English blues guys like Clapton that you grew up listening to, or listening to, the Delta bluesmen like Robert Johnson, and then you go over to England and are playing, like the. Kind of like your version of what you heard by listening to, the British blues guys who learned all this stuff from the American guys, and you're doing Hey Jude and Have You Ever Loved a Woman? So it's kind of like everything's come around full circle on this CD. And how did the English audience receive you? It seemed like you can hear the yelling and applauses on the CD, but what was the visual image of the crowd's reception of the Headhunters from the stage?
Oh, the crowds were great over there, especially Ramblin Man. They were out of sight, man. Since we didn't go over there for many, many years, we were just we're not a household word over there. So we're kind of building the brand over there, so to speak. And I think when people do first see us walk out on stage, they're going, well, who are these guys? Where'd these guys come from? And then really, I think if they stick with us, they always seem to really enjoy it, because a lot of our influences, and it's true, even though we love blues, we love Robert Johnson, we love Otis Rush, we love Sleepy John Estes, we love Mississippi John Hurt, we love B.B. King, Albert King, Freddie King, we love Howlin' Wolf, Muddy Waters, all these people. But it took the English guys like Rolling Stones, it took Cream, it took Peter Green. It took John Mayall, Jeff Beck, and people like that to bring the music of our homeland back to us. And I was talking to Richard today or yesterday. Blackstone Cherry have released they've released 2 blues EPs on their label, and this week their blues EP, Back to the Blues #2, is #2 on the Billboard blues charts. And their treatment of the blues is not traditional. It's Blackstone Cherry doing blues songs. But see, that's the same thing when we were growing up. When we heard Cream and we heard the Jeff Beck group, or we heard maybe John Mayall was a little more traditional, but a lot of the heavier bands like Zeppelin, I'm sure that a lot of the purists looked at those guys shaking their heads going, well, that's not blues, you know. But you got to understand, those guys like that brought the blues to us youngsters and made us go searching back and going, you know, when you looked on a Cream album, look on Crossroads and go, oh, Robert Johnson wrote this. I want to know more about Robert Johnson. I want to know more about Chester Burnett, who wrote Sitting on Top of the World from Wheels of Fire, and that turned out to be Howlin' Wolf. And then when you check out McKinley Morganfield and find out that's Muddy Waters, he wrote such great songs like Rolling Stone and things like that. It took those bands from England to tip us to the Delta and Chicago blues greats. And same thing going on with Blackstone Cherry. They're introducing a younger group of fans, the same thing. And I think that's an ongoing deal with blues. It has to expand that way, you know. But as I get older, Mark, I really love searching back and discovering artists that maybe I never had heard, you know, back, you know, in the day. And there's so many great blues artists unheralded guys, you know. And thank God for Eric Clapton and people like that they did expose us to those guys, you know, and get the church going initially.
Yeah, and I don't want to, you know, connect your rediscover comment in just a couple of minutes. Yeah, I just don't want to move away from Ramblin' Man just yet.
Sure.
But
sure, man.
Yeah, you have real standout performance on Shuffling Back to Memphis. What Richard wrote that song?
Well, Shuffling Back to Memphis was actually written by the initial start of the song was a fellow by the name of Mark Orr that was in the band from like 92 to 95, something like that. And Mark Orr brought that song to the first, when we did the first Johnnie Johnson project back in 92, 93. We did another version of it back then. And it's just been a live staple of our show for a long time. And, Mark Orr actually brought that song to us. And the beautiful thing about that song, the band, Levon Helm and the band, they did a version of it as well. They loved that album we did with Johnnie Johnson called Out of Work, and they loved that song, and they covered it on their album called High on the Hog. A lot of people don't realize that. And they done an outstanding job of it, man. I mean, really, it's humbling.
You know, what is it about Memphis that causes so many artists and writers to write about the city and the river?
Well,
it's
interesting observation. Well, there's just something about any musical city usually has a river running through it. You know, if you check out Muscle Shoals, There's a river through that. New Orleans has definitely got a river, water around it. Memphis got that muddy Mississippi running through it. Louisville is a funky town. That's where I grew up. It's a great music town, especially back in the 60s. And the Ohio River, Cincinnati, you know, it just seemed like most of the really vibrant, alive towns have a river running through it. I'm not really sure what that's all about. But Memphis is a very interesting place, and everything is just slower over there. That's been my observation over the years. I've driven through it several times on my own. I've taken trips to the Delta and down to Helena, and it just seemed like when you get in that area of the country, time just pulls back, and it's just less stressful. Now, it may have changed the last 10 years because I haven't been down there in a while, but there's just something magical in Memphis. You know, it was an antenna for great music. Let's think of, you had Sam Phillips, Sun Records, bringing Howlin' Wolf to us, and of course Elvis and Carl Perkins and Roy Orbison and all those great artists, which were very steeped in the blues. But there's just something very special about that area right there. It's hallowed ground of some sort, you know. And then when you cross the state line and you get into Mississippi, and you really get down in the Delta, it really gets magical down there, man. It's just something else. It really is.
Okay, and you play slide on Walking with the Wolf, is that right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay. What type of slide do you use to get that sound?
My favorite slide is glass. I like glass, and I use a signature slide made by the Rocky Mountain Slide Company. And it's a kind of a version of. They have another slide called the Swamp Frog, and it's basically the same thing. And it's really their take on the old Chlorocidin pill bottle. If you remember the Chlorocidin cold tablets, originally they were in glass. They were little glass bottles back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, actually. And Duane Allman popularized those bottles. When he played slide with the Allman Brothers, that's what he used. And we, from reading guitar player interviews and, we got hip to that was the way to go to get that sound. And Rocky Mountain Slide Company, it's a little heavier slide than the original Chlorocidin slide. I've got some original bottles, Mark, but I don't like them as well. I like a little heavier glass slide. Now, some people like metal. Some people like brass. And different things. It's just the glass seems to work better for me to get the tone that I like, And on Walking with the Wolf, that's like an open D tuning. And I play an open D, and I play an open E. I play an open A, open G, and I also play in standard key. And what I love about slide, it is so close to being, you can really get vocal-like. You can really hit those blue notes, just like a vocalist. You can emulate Ray Charles. You can emulate just about anybody with a slide. And listen to Derek Trucks. He does that beautiful, man. Really, really plays a really vocal style, And that's glass slide, man. That's what I like. That's,
Okay. Okay. I'm just hoping that there are some younger listeners in the audience who are wanting to be inquisitive. So it's just trying to answer everyone's questions. So when you're putting together the set list to go out and do the Ramblin Man Fair, even though you didn't know you were being recorded, is it designed to include some of your British heroes, just for the local audience, or is that pretty much your standard set?
That was pretty much our standard set. We've been doing the Beatles medley for quite some time. And, you know, when we start doing that, like most of the little jams we do, they just kind of start off one night. We end up doing them. We go, hey, that was fun. Let's just keep doing it. And when we done Don't Let Me Down, and then we started doing Hey Jude at the end, and it just works perfectly. But there again, it really came full circle going to England and playing that, you know, because that's the influence. I mean, come on, the Beatles and the Stones and people like that is what got us into this music anyway. But you know, no, really, that set was not. We did change up a little bit. Picking on Nashville wasn't as big as it was in the States and Canada. It didn't really take off. It wasn't really worked over there as much. You know, it was more like our second and third albums were really our third album, Brave On, was bigger in England than the other two first albums. And so we just basically, we didn't really feature as many off Picking on Nashville the first go around over there, you know. And we just kind of pulled back on Do Miss Walker and Walk Softly the first time around. We're just now starting to play those songs over there. But more or less, we didn't debut any new songs over there. We just kind of stripped down the set since we were, you know, we only had so much time to play that day. And I think it was an hour set, I'm pretty sure, you know. So we usually like to play an hour and a half. If you give us 2 hours, we'll just keep going.
Okay. And also, you know, towards the end of the CD, the drum solo and, you know, hidden behind the double bass and cymbals, you know, is Fred. Is he like a alien engineered human octopus hybrid type person? It's like, it sounds like he has about 8 arms going all at the same time.
Well, Fred came from outer space, you know. They dropped him off down on the farm when they just dropped him off down there, and he's been playing like that ever since he was just a little boy. I mean, when I first met Fred was 1968, when me and Richard and Fred started playing in 1968. We've been playing together off and on most of the time since 1968, which makes 51 years this year. And Fred was always good at doing a solo, and his solo has developed over the years. And hey, man, he's got it down. He's natural. He's natural with it.
You know, it just seems like there's that special relationship between the guitarist and drummer. You know, like Keith Richards just, you know, really admires Charlie Watts and, you know, Page and Bonham. It just seems like everyone just kind of like gravitates, you know, to Fred, and you know, you just gave our listeners an exclusive about his unusual heritage. But there's just he's just you know, he just doesn't miss a beat, and he has just you know, he's playing with his hands as well. I mean, he has everything going on. Double bass. You know, like what makes, you know, the drummer so like such you know, that unique personality that, you know, just really seems to like bring the band together?
Well, a band is only as good as a drummer. You got to have a great drummer and the bass player. To me, those are the two main components before you get into the vocal and the melody line. If it don't have the groove to make people move, then you might as well just go home, you know. And even though Fred's a great solo, he can play a great solo and all that, Fred has got a great feel and a great groove and great pocket And as I've gotten older, of course, growing up in the '60s, we were all about guitar solos and Alvin Lee, who can play the fastest, and Eric Clapton, Jimi Hendrix, Jimmy Page, and all that stuff. But as I've gotten older over the years, I love playing rhythm guitar off the drums. I just soon play rhythm. I mean, I like playing lead, obviously, but rhythm, because Richard and I, we have a good chemistry together, the way we place our notes. But I place whenever I'm playing rhythm guitar, my downbeat is going to go down with his snare beat. That's why I kind of go back near the drums a lot. And that's because I'm playing off of what he's doing, And, man, if you don't have that beat, you just don't have it. You got to have that groove. You got to have it. Every band's got to have it. Stones, Charlie Watts, and Ringo Starr is a great drummer, man. And Fred is too. And hey, man, life is too short to not have a good groove. It's just not. You gotta have it. You gotta make people move, man. That's all there is to it.
Okay, and Blackstone Cherry comes out on your
Ramblin Man.
Don't Let Me Down encore to do the close your set. So you have almost like both family bands playing together.
Well, they were actually headlining Ramblin' Man that day, and we played earlier in the day. There were probably, I don't know, we played in the afternoon, and there was probably 2 or 3 bands before they played. So they were there, and they came out on the end and done the encore with us. And there was another band from England that were running on that tour with us called Bad Touch. They came out as well and on the encore. But really, that whole night was about Blackstone Cherry. That was their show, and it was amazing to see all the hard work they've done over the years, and just seeing the crowd love them like they do over there. It was amazing to see the things that they've accomplished over there. So, yeah, it was very special for us to have those boys come out and be a part of the encore with us. It was real sweet, man. It was a great moment for sure, because they were responsible for getting us over there. They really were. Mm-hmm. We would have never went. I don't think.
Okay. Well, and you've been there since then. So, do the Headhunters have plans to do more extensive touring now?
I'm sure in the right situation, if we're invited to go back and it makes sense and logistically and everything falls into place, I could see us going back and doing another English tour. Yeah. I mean, at one point, I'm not going to lie to you, I was like, nothing against the English people. I love them. I do. And I love eating fish and chips. but I just not into being that far away from home, But we had such a great time this last time with Dan Baird and Homemade Sin and Jason and the Scorchers. We just had a great time with those guys. I mean, and I felt like this time maybe we actually made some progress in getting our name out a little better. Played some bigger rooms this time. So, God only knows. We'll see what happens, Mark. If the opportunities presents itself, I'm sure we'll go back.
Okay. Well, we have a nice-sized English audience, so hopefully they're listening now, or we'll listen to the archive and tell their local venue managers to book you.
Oh, they're great people, man. And and the thing is, what's so neat is our family heritage kind of starts from the UK, all of us. So it was really neat going to the homeland, so to speak. The only thing, we got to play Glasgow, Scotland, which was neat, and I would really love to see Ireland someday. I don't know if it'll ever happen, but I would at least, hopefully, we'll get to go see Ireland someday. But yeah, we'd love to come back in the right situation for sure.
Okay, and you just mentioned early on in the show that you have 3 bonus tracks that the band did with Johnnie Johnson added to the Ramblin Man Fair CD. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got to work with one of your heroes, Johnny? We got together again at the Johnnie Johnson Blues Festival in Fairmont before it got rained out and the storm. But who is Johnny, and how did you end up doing a full CD with him, and then this adding a few more of his songs onto the Ramblin' Man CD?
We're all big fans of Chuck Berry. We love the Chuck Berry Chess record catalog. And then when you start listening to a lot of those songs, the piano is such a big part of what's going on. And, when we were growing up, we didn't know who the piano player was. We had no idea. So we started being more students of the music and going back and studying liner notes and going, oh, Johnnie Johnson's name was popping up, here and there in the interviews. And we become aware of Johnny. And, let me get this right, 91, 92. Johnny, for years and years, he left the road. He was out with Chuck. And then at some point, Johnny got tired of traveling and got tired of the music business, and he took a job driving a bus in St. Louis. And Ian Stewart, the guy that played piano with the Rolling Stones, was very influential in getting Keith Richards to track him down when they were doing Hail, Hail, Rock and Roll. And they found Johnny and got him out of retirement and got him out playing again. So, when we saw Hail, Hail, Rock and Roll, we saw Johnnie Johnson. And then in 91, 92, Johnny released his first solo album called Johnny Be Bad. And on our way to do the Macy's Day Parade, I can't remember. It's a little clouded now, but we were going to New York, and we listened to that album on the bus, and we were just blown away. Because some of our friends in NRBQ were on it. One of my guitar heroes from Louisville, Steve Ferguson, was on it. And, of course, Eric Clapton was on it. Eric Clapton was on that release as well. And so we were just we were like, oh, man, what a great album. So we were up for a Grammy in 92. Maybe it was 91. Everything's a blur, man. It's a blur. Maybe 91. So we're at this Grammy party. Yeah, it was actually in 91. And we're at a Grammy party. We go the night before the ceremony. And, in this room, there's everybody. There's Roy Rogers. There's Buddy Guy. There's the Allman Brothers. And then here comes Johnnie Johnson, and we just all freaked out. We wanted to meet Johnnie Johnson. And so Johnny's manager noticed how much we were into it. Of course, our manager saw it too. So they got talking. The next thing I know, we were asked to produce the next Johnnie Johnson album for Elektra Records, and which would have been this is when the band with Doug and Ricky were still in the band. And So we make the connection with Johnny. So in '92, unfortunately, in June of '92, the original lineup of the Headhunters imploded. And we had to put the band back together real hurriedly. And which we got our cousin Anthony in on bass, who was a shoe-in, amazing musician, and Mark Orr, great writer, great singer, and he's more of a blues singer. So one of the there was two. We're talking about like June, man. We're putting everything back together. I mean, the band implodes. We're picking up shrapnel around us. We're going, okay, we got to go tour. We got to do another album for Mercury. Plus, we've agreed to do another album for Johnnie Johnson, producing that. So the first thing of business is get back out on the road, get an album together, which become Rave On. And then, I can't remember, it was either in the fall or winter of '93, I can't remember. Johnnie Johnson flew to Nashville. We picked him up. He came up to Glasgow, and we jammed with him. And it was just magic from the moment we started jamming with him. He made us play like very mature. He made us play just stuff that we just didn't normally do. So we got together, wrote a few songs on the spot. Mark brought a few, Richard brought a few. A lot were written on the floor. And then we all reconvened at Sound Shop, and I believe it was only '93. And we recorded That'll Work. And when it was released, we did some touring with Johnny to promote it, and we just become very close to Johnny. He was like our uncle. We were very close to him. So until he passed away, we played off and on with him. I mean, there was not very many years we did not play with Johnny at some point, maybe a show or two here and there, And then and then we brought him back. We were doing an album called Soul back in the early 2000s, and we brought Johnny in to play some piano on Have You Ever Loved a Woman? And we just kept rolling tape. We found out that Johnny had some health issues going on, and we just kept rolling tape, and that's how Meet Me in Bluesland came along, So it was just from that relation. It really all started from those little Chess records, hearing those records, then meeting him at the Grammy party, and then doing That'll Work, and it just kind of morphed into a great thing, a great friendship over the years. So the bonus tracks were just they were actually laying around from the Meet Me in Bluesland sessions. Actually, that's what they were from.
Okay, they're very good.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have about another 20 minutes left. But there are a number of other things we can get into. You've been doing your radio show Lowdown Hoedown for about 20 years now. Listeners can tune in Monday nights from 8 to 11 Eastern at wdnsfm.com. And you mentioned you were rediscovering some of these artists that someone like Keith Richards is just getting into, and the Stones popularize.
Yes.
This artist from like the 40s or something. But even though you're talking about rediscovering musicians, but Barbara and I are basically doing that with some of these topics in history. It's basically the same idea, just going about it through different directions. But over like for example, you've been playing a lot of Shuggie Otis over the last couple weeks. And I started going to YouTube and looking for some of his songs and like the Freedom Flight CD that might be something I have to order sometime soon. But that's one of the neat things about your radio show is you get a lot of standard classics from Muddy Waters, but there's these just most people are never going to hear Shuggie Otis on just your mainstream FM station, but you're introducing us to what he was doing in the early 70s. Can you explain the audience his importance?
Yeah. Well, his dad was Johnnie Otis, great band leader, drummer. Well, he played several instruments, but if you go back and look for the original version of Willie and the Hand Jive that Eric Clapton popularized in the 70s, that was originally done by Johnnie Otis. Johnny was a great R&B cat from the Los Angeles area. And his son, Shuggie, came up early. He started on drums, but then he switched over to guitar. And he would go out playing with his dad, and they would have to put sunglasses on him and paint a mustache on him because he was too young to play some of the bars. But I'm not really sure how he got discovered. I'll tell you the album that I first heard him on. Al Cooper Session number 2, called Cooper Sessions, and introducing Shuggie Otis. And I kid you not, as much as I love Michael Bloomfield, who I revere quite highly, along with Eric Clapton and B.B. King and everybody else, Shuggie Otis played for a 14, 15-year-old kid, played as mature as anybody I've ever heard, man, on that album right there. And just an amazing feel, amazing tone, great vibrato, and really, so what happened to Shuggie, with each album, he kind of got away from the blues, and his music got deeper, got more into the R&B thing. The album that really everybody cites as a big influence is Inspiration, Information, or Information, which I get it mixed up all the time. It's Information, Inspiration, I think. And it came out in 1974. Of course, he did write another important thing on Freedom Flight. He wrote Strawberry Letter number 23, which the Brothers Johnson made a hit in 1977 with that, And but if you listen to the album from 1974, man, it's a soulful version of Pet Sounds. I swear, man, it is a heavy, great album. And not only is he a great guitar player, he's a great writer, great producer, and a great vocalist. And he's a big influence on people like Joel Bramhall, too. I think he was a big influence on Prince. There's a lot of people loved him. And I tell you, I was hip to him back in the 70s. But sometimes, you know how it is, you get away from people, and then when you hear him, you go, my gosh, I forgot how good he was, And I think a lot of people that are into blues guitar should definitely go check out Shuggie Otis. And there's a really cool clip out on the internet of Shuggie, Johnny, and his band jamming Roy Buchanan. It's really neat. Pretty neat.
Oh, wow.
It's out there. Shuggie doesn't play much. Shuggie looks a little bit timid in this clip, but if he wanted to cut loose, he could have held his own with Roy. That's just my opinion, But Shuggie's one of my favorite guitar players, man. Him and Michael Bloomfield, they're wonderful.
Yeah, and that's just one of the interesting aspects of your radio show is you don't let us forget some of these people who got us to where we are, and last week I think you played Rare Earth, and you don't hear people aren't going to hear them much on mainstream radio, but it's places like WDN SFM that you could dig deeper into those lost tracks that really have had a profound impact on other artists.
Sure.
And there are some nefarious legends associated with the blues, the Crossroads stuff. But you have a gospel CD, and the Headhunters play Spirit in the Sky in concerts. You're friends with Phil Kagi. Glass Harp was on your show about 3 years ago. Phil had. I think Phil's had a 50-year career in gospel music. Warren Haynes is one of your good friends. The Allman Brothers are, kind of there's a gospel in the Allman Brothers canon, but and another one of your good friends is Billy F. Gibbons, who is a reverend now. You're playing Amazing Grace on Arlen Roth's Slide Guitar Summit. So how is blues being used by a lot of people now to make the world a better place?
Well, the blues came out of the church. It came out of the fields. They came, there's field hollers. When they were working in the field, they were singing. But the really deep blues came out of churches. McKinley Morganfield sang in church. Muddy Waters. His uncle was a preacher or cousin. I can't think of his name right now. It escapes me. But the really deep blues come out of the churches. And the blues has a spirit about it. Mm-hmm. And it makes people feel, a lot of people think, oh, man, the blues make you feel bad. You're just going to go out here and lay in a ditch, But no, man, I think the blues make you happy. Man, anybody pick up a guitar and play a Jimmy Reed shuffle. Play You Got Me Running like Jimmy Reed does, and tell me that if you don't feel better by the time you play that, then you don't have any soul, man. I'm telling you, there's just nothing more gratifying than sitting around and just playing Jimmy Reed, man, on the guitar. And it's as simple as it can be. And it's not about the simplicity; it's about the feel, but there's a spirit, and I think, I do believe the blues makes the world a better place. I pretty much, on my show, I'm mostly focused on, I'm not as focused on the newer blues artists, because there's great shows out there on the internet that focus on whatever's happening in the blues now. I will play something new from Jimmy Bone every now and then, or, I've had Arlen on. But mostly my focus is like 1990 backwards, really, and that's kind of because I'm looking for stuff that people just may have missed, and we got another fine band from this area here called Otis, a lot of people don't really know. Well, yeah, a lot of people do know about them. They've been to England 2 or 3 times, and these kids have got a really good handle on the blues too. I mean, I'm talking about the deep blues. You know, they know all about John Brown. You know, they know about Sylvester Weaver. You know, I mean, yeah, you know, it's cool to know about Albert King and Freddie King and B.B. King and that. But, man, if you really want to get down to the nitty-gritty where the rubber meets the road, you got to really get back, man, and go down the Delta. You got to go to Stovall's plantation. You got to go down there where the cotton was picked and find out, you know, there's so many great artists that just never got the air, you know, way before B.B. King, you know, and there's just so much to discover through it, and it can make the world a better place, and God knows it needs to be a better place. I think it can be, man. I'm happy where I'm at. My little part of the world's happy right now, you know.
Okay, and speaking of keeping people happy,
yeah.
You know, the Headhunters recently played with Bret Michaels. He's a local boy for me. He's back in the Pittsburgh area pretty frequently to do charity events for children. He just seems like a really nice guy. You know, you've been a part-time member of Lynyrd Skynyrd. You know, jammed with the Marshall Tucker band, and you know, a couple weeks ago, you just played with Charlie Daniels. Like, you know, when you're working, you may not have a whole lot of time to practice. How do you know, just kind of walk into a situation where you're playing with someone else or they're playing with you, and you know, how do you you know, just agree on a, you know, just a standard song, and then just kind of like nod to each other to, you know, when to do a lead or something like that? How do you work something like that out?
Oh, it's got to be. It's about a grace of God. You just don't fall on your butt, you know. And sometimes, I mean, I've been in situations. One time at the Dallas Guitar Show, I was playing between Jack Pearson, Red Bocart, and Bugs Henderson, and I was way out of my league, man. You know, and but those guys pushed me into another realm. Somehow I must have played the right thing, you know, because I you know, the people seem to like it. But you know, music is communication. It's not a competition. It's meant to have fun. It's meant to make people happy. It's meant to make people think. And I would be playing music if I wasn't making a living at it. And by the grace of God, I'm 66 now, and I can say that I would not. There was nothing different. I mean, obviously, I could have made some better business decisions personally on investing or something like that, but I can't complain. I would not. You know, I would not change my career for nothing, man. You know, I've got to, like you said, I've got to me and Billy Gibbons are really good friends. We talked for an hour and a half Easter, and it was over another version of Amazing Grace I did. He heard, and he called me, wanting to know what I was playing through and this and that, you know. And we're just buddies. I've always admired Billy. And, you know, getting to play with Charlie Daniels, getting to play with Government Mule, getting to play with Marshall Tucker Band, Blackberry Smoke, and people like that. The only regret, I had a chance to play with the Allman Brothers one time. I got to play with Skynyrd, as you know. What would really just capped it all off, I went to an Allman Brothers show one time, and I didn't show up till after it was over. And Warren said, "Why didn't you tell me you were coming? We would have got you up to play." And I was thinking, well, I would have been a nervous wreck. But I do regret that now. And I regret had offered one time to go sit in with Albert Collins, which I would have got my butt spanked real good. But I regret that too. But it's just a thrill to get to know these guys, Mark. You know, it's like Arlen. Growing up in the 70s, we read his columns in Guitar Player magazine. We knew what a great player he was, and to get to know people like Arlen, you go, it's just a gift from God, man. It's a gift from above, to get to do what we do, and we're very, very lucky. We're very blessed to get to do this for a living, and sometimes you go, you get tired. You don't get so much tired of the work. You get tired in the work, maybe from the traveling, this and that. But, man, I don't practice as much as I should, but a big part of practicing is listening to music and learning when not to play. It's not, playing a solo is a lot like writing a letter to a friend. You got to use good dictation. You just can't scream the whole time. You got to take a break. Let the person digest what you've played. I had somebody one time say, "Well, what do you? You'll play a phrase and you'll stop." And so, I don't see the reason just to keep playing. Let the bluegrass guys do that. They can do that better than I can. But man, you want to play something, let the guys out the crowd or the people react. Hopefully, you touch them. And music is communication, and it's a great form of communication. It's a gift from above. It's a great gift from above. That's all I can tell you. I do know that when I do believe I was called to play music, I know the exact spot that the good Lord probably said, "This is what you're going to be doing for a living." It was in '68, and about 2 weeks later, I met Richard and Fred. So there you go. It's an amazing thing.
Okay, so we have about 3 minutes left, and I don't want to go overtime.
No, 3 more hours. Come on, man. We're just getting started now. We're not even talking about people yet. I'm kidding.
Yeah, I don't want to have my Spinal Tap moments right now, but you had that A to Z Rock Fest coming up.
That's here in Glasgow,
anything else?
Yeah. Well, that is actually some friends doing that. I'll be on. That's in Glasgow, Kentucky, this Saturday, Friday and Saturday. Rock A to Z. The Headhunters will actually be in Dubuque, Iowa, and Minneapolis, Minnesota. So I will miss that. But as far as the rest of the year, the Headhunters, we got the 2 dates this weekend, and we got a show in Alabama on New Year's Eve, and then we're going to reconvene, get together early in the year, and start recording a new EP or album, start working on new material, and then we'll hit the road again. And plus I got another project I'm working on with my stepson, that the songs he wrote. He's a real talented cat, and maybe next year that'll see light of the day as well,
Okay. So,
well, hey, man, I'm lucky to do what I get to do, and thank y'all for having me. Thank you.
We are just very appreciative that you were able to work us into your busy schedule, and people can find out more about you by going to KentuckyHeadhunters.net and tune in Monday nights for your WDNSFM.com for Lowdown Hoedown, and check Vintage Guitar Magazine. And I think we're almost out of time. Barbara, do you want to wrap up anything? And I just,
sure.
Okay.
Happy to do that. It's been an amazing show. It's been very interesting, and we are so very grateful to both of our guests. I actually even recognized a lot of the names you guys were throwing around, so I really feel like I've been in the mix here all along. Thank you everyone for listening. We so appreciate your coming and listening and sharing with us your time and your energy. This will be up on YouTube tomorrow, and if you couldn't catch it tonight, then you can catch it then. Good night, everybody.